Thank you for hanging with us. We've saved something good for the end. No pressure. Please give Eric a round of applause.
Thank you. So, show of hands, who thinks I'm going to suck the most because they put me last? I've gone from keynote 2 years ago to either footnote or a bum note speaking here. So I'm not really using Windows 3.1, but it's 27 years old today. That'll make you feel old. Risky risks are risky, asterisks, especially when nobody understands risk. So first up, apologize in advance. Risky risks can be very boring. Talking about risks is boring. Worst of all, listening to people who want to talk about risks is very boring, so I will do my best to not make it boring. However, I've sat through some talks that have gone so over my head today that it's my turn to get revenge now to all you technical people. I'm gonna get GRC on your ass, right? So, for what it's worth, I've sat through hundreds of presentations by risk professionals and been bored out of my tree. For some reason, risk professionals always have a hobby which is like extreme sports or base jumping or flying, and they always go on and on about flying and crashes and black box recorders. I promise, I've only got one slide with a plane on it. All right. So let's dive in. So the premise of the talk is the way I've sold it to get my paper accepted was that nobody understands risk. Obviously, somebody understands risks, me. What I'm really getting at is that I think there's a lot of misconceptions around the concepts of risks, especially in this industry, and they kind of propagate up. There's often this house of cards that exist, and we kind of add to it and add to it and add to it. And I think it's fun to try to. I thought it would be a fun thing to try and unpack what was going on, or at least what I thought was going on based on the observations that I've had. So if you are willing and you consider yourself a risk taker, then join me on this magical risk. Yeah, I work for Trustwave now, so I was told I wasn't allowed to have any gifts or anything irreverent. So, all right, let's start at the very beginning. So Vitaly Kamluk went on a plane and saw this in his seat back. And if you think about that, Vitaly Kamluk, I don't speak Russian, but I think that is basically Russian for my whole life is looking for cameras. So as was his destiny, he saw this thing in the seat back, and he tweeted it. And he was pretty rational about it. He was like, hey, I saw this sensor. I think it's a camera. I don't know. And he pinged Singapore Airlines, and they went, yeah, it's a camera. It's turned off, but we thought we might use it in the future for gesture tracking, so when you're watching a movie on a plane or something. But predictably, the Infosec side of Twitter went into meltdown. And there was all of this crap that was like, oh, they're spying on you, they're spying on you. And it amazed me that a lot of risk professionals came out, and Infosec professionals came out and said, yeah, this is why I always travel with a roll of electrical tape. My favorite one was the guy on LinkedIn. For the technical people in the audience, if you don't know what LinkedIn is, like Twitter, but wearing a suit and with a little pinch of cocaine. This guy on LinkedIn was having this rant, and his premise was that they're using facial recognition so that they can work out who you are. And I'm kind of like, dude, you're on a plane, which you paid for with your credit card. They know who you are, your credit card number. They know where you're going, and they know when you're coming back. They don't need to use facial recognition. Also, the network engineer in me was kind of trying to think about the logistics of streaming the video from 300 seats on a plane. And I know that when you hit pause when you're watching a movie on a plane, there's a 3-second lag before it actually pauses. And I'm wondering if that's because all the bandwidth is consumed by all the video there. And then I'm kind of like, well, who the hell wants to watch me sitting on a plane? So anyway, I went to work, and I happened to work with a few people who are ex-Intel community, and I had a big rant over a coffee with someone that used to be a spook, and he went, yeah. Of course, when I was a spy, we had an agreement with the airlines where there was a particular seat that had a bug in it, and if we had anyone of interest, 2 people flying, we'd upgrade them to that particular seat, and then we'd be able to record them. So it's like, well, that's kind of interesting that if you're on a plane and you're a person of interest, then there's a good chance that they will turn on this camera. But they'll also turn on the microphone, which has been in your seat for, 20 years. So it didn't. I don't understand what was going on with people ranting. And I think, this is my expression for how I felt about this. So I think this is where it all came, sort of where that idea stems from, which is these webcam covers. How many of you have got one of these bad boys installed on your laptops? I was quite interested to walk around the CTF room earlier on and just have a little bit of a straw poll on how many people in that room had these cam covers. And it warmed the cockles of my heart that I didn't actually see that many of them. If through my eye, and when I say about through my eyes, looking at this from a risk perspective, for someone to be watching you through your webcam, it means that they've compromised your laptop, which means that they're pretty sophisticated. They're running code on your laptop. They can see your files, they can see your screen, they can listen to your microphone, and yet that's the line you decide to draw. And I think, well, what is going on? Now, I understand that stalkerware is a thing, and it's very bad, and it's prevalent. And I understand that nobody wants to accidentally find that they're in a work video con and they've turned their cam on when they're working from home and they're sort of butt naked or something. So there obviously is a time and a place for them. And I started to wonder whether this is an analogy for what we do in Infosec, which is there are so many variables that we can't control that are out of our control, but hey, here's 10 centimeters of electrical tape, at least I can do something. So I think maybe the answer to this is in human psychology. So I thought, well, nobody understands risk, nobody understands human psychology. So I thought I'd give you the benefit of the work that I've done. I went and I read an awful lot about human psychology, and I read white papers and studies. And essentially what I've done is, and I'll share this with you, this is the benefit of the research that I've done. Everything you need to know about human psychology. So the first thing is people think, say, and do things. They do this for a variety of reasons. Some of those things are completely irrational. Some of those things are really dumb. And psychology experts can't agree on any of it. So now that you've reached about the level of a third-year psych major, we can go back to talking about risk. So what is risk? Here's my plane. You've got to have a plane. So what I've observed is that people coming into this industry, or sort of risk noobs, tend to have this perception, and it's propagated by all the risk professionals who do talks about airplanes, that we're in a plane and risk is a mountain, and all we have to do is steer our plane around the mountain. We've eradicated the risk. As long as we don't hit the ground or the mountain, everything's good. We've treated the risk. The ISO 31000 definition of risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, which at the time was a big deal because for the first time they'd shifted I'm going to use the paradigm word, they've shifted the paradigm to acknowledge that the effect of uncertainty on objectives can also be positive and can also be negative. So that kind of threw things around. When I'm trying to explain the concept of risk to people, I kind of put it a little bit like this, which is rather than a plane and a mountain, if you think as yourself being in a ship and risk being Mother Nature and you pitting the wits of your crew against Mother Nature, and a risk professional will come along or you'll get a report that effectively says, well, you need to eliminate all the risk, which essentially means you need to take your ship and you need to move it to higher ground. And of course, that doesn't really work, not least because a ship at higher ground is just a sort of rusty warehouse with a sloping floor and really crappy access, and now your neighbors think you're some weird Christian cult. But we actually need to surround ourselves, for our business to work, we need to be enveloped within risk, and we need to surround ourselves. And managing risk is deciding not to put too many containers on the ship, or not to take that ship through that particular waterway during that time of year, or so on and so forth. So that's what we're talking. When we're managing risk, we're accepting that risk is opportunity, and we have to take those risks, and we have to be pragmatic with how we manage it. So let's get down to risk in the concept of information security and what we're getting at, which is really what my rant/stroke talk is about. So it's a tool we use to select what we will test. It's a framework we use to measure the findings we have and achieve some sort of consistency. Consistency is better than perfection. It's the language we use to communicate those findings to the business. It's the case we build or the business builds to get some money from someone. So it's a tool we use for social engineering cash out of people in suits. It's the tool used to prioritize our response to those findings. And most importantly of all, it's something we use to make our risk registers much more colorful. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is the 5x5 matrix. This is where it gets really exciting for me. Obviously, we've got the severe stuff right at the top. We've got the green stuff at the bottom. It's the old traffic light system. Green is good, red is bad. The thing of interest is the little red box down, I'm dyslexic, so I'm trying to wait, down in the bottom right corner, which is black swan events, which those are the things that have a ridiculously big consequence, but almost a negligible likelihood. So they're the 9/11s that we can't really do much about from a risk perspective other than insure. But if we don't think about those things and have a conversation about them, that in itself is considered negligent, and then it's kind of awkward. So you always have to be kind of mindful of those things, but you have to be very wary that you don't throw all of your resources, which are finite, into worrying about those things. That's kind of why I think we have concrete blocks on the corner of every sort of pedestrian walkway now, because there was an event and everyone had to be seen to be doing something. Now, you can tailor a risk matrix for your organization, and you can actually determine your risk for appetite if you believe, unlike me, that a risk appetite is a thing that you can actually have and manage. So it's not uncommon to see organizations who've tweaked this a little bit, and I thought what would be fun was to come up with a kind of an Australian standard for risk matrix. So we use the taxonomy of the organization. So yeah, nah, and nah, yeah, I thought it's pretty proud of. And of course, it's Australian mentality is she'll be right, up until the point where it's just. I'm a pomp, so obviously the British one's slightly different. A little bit more granularity, more of a propensity towards tea and biscuits. Pop bugger, pop the kettle on. That's the worst that can happen. Yeah, Brexit. I know where I'm going with this. All right, so the concept of risk, as I see it, is we come up with some risks. So here we've found 8 risks. There's another couple of risks that we haven't found. They're the unknown unknowns. And we've graded them into criticality using our custom risk register. This might be a pen test report or a risk assessment or just a spreadsheet that Jerry's got on his desk with all the things that he's worried about. We then try to treat some of those risks. So we've now pulled some of the critical ones a little bit down there. We've made them less problematic. We've still got the ones we don't know about, not that they'll ever make it onto anyone's list. And then what we do, we take them to the organizational risk register. And so this organizational risk register, I'm talking conceptually because this doesn't always happen. Sometimes what organizations do is do the thing that the CEO got in the lift and talked to someone about because he'd seen something on Four Corners and, oh, we have to worry about X or something. So more mature organizations have this concept of a risk register, and they're putting everything into context. And theoretically, or realistically speaking, an organization has this kind of unspoken dotted line, on one side of which we do something about this, and on the other side of the dotted line, we do nothing, or otherwise known as we put it in the risk register. And once you understand and start looking through this lens, which is you're always going to have, the way risk works, you have a list of things, some of which you do and some of which you don't do. And there's also the things that you don't even know about. What's interesting is that for years, cybersecurity people have been going, oh, the business doesn't understand. It doesn't understand the risk. They don't really, and it's often the business does understand the risk, but what they realize is that in context with all the other things the business is worried about, none of them actually make it over the line into, we need to do something about this. And this is where we start to see problems and long rants on LinkedIn about nonsense. So let's dig into what I think is going on here. So problem number 1, it's how we measure risk. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Hamish Blake does stock photos now. So we think, I say we, the business thinks we measure risk with a micrometer, when in fact it is completely finger in the wind. Like where things go on that risk register. And the reason it's finger in the wind is we just don't have the data. We talk about quantitative data analysis. It's all fiction. 86.2% of all statistics are made up on the spot. I don't really believe that there is any data. So we're getting more data, and we're getting more data at the top right-hand red side of the stuff that's really common and really high impact. We get a little bit more data on, but the rest of it is wishy-washy nonsense, and that's because we can't really calculate things like the cost of a breach, because where do you even begin to try to put numbers on things like lost opportunity, or how do you not conflate the cost of putting something right that should have been right in the first place with the cost of the cleanup? Or how do you not include the cost that you threw down the drain trying to respond to an incident by, wasting 40 grand on incident response for a problem that probably would have only cost the organization $1,000, but because you had this retainer, you thought, let's go and roll IR. So the measurements are a little bit shonky. The other thing you'll see over and over again if you do tune into LinkedIn is the common cry of, we don't speak the right language. The reason they don't understand the problems that we're trying to convey is because we don't speak their language. We need to learn to speak the board's language. And essentially what they're getting at is we need to speak about dollar values and money. And of course, we can't speak about dollar values and monies with a straight face because we're just making up all these numbers. The next one is that our worldview is shaped by our experiences. So I saw this years ago when I started to talk to vendors about what is the problem we should be worrying about. And if you talk to a vendor that sells denial of service products, they will tell you denial of service is the worst thing. If you talk to a company that finds APTs in your firewall, they'll tell you, well, APTs are where it's all at. And at first I thought they were sort of self-serving and that they were trying to push their own products. But then I realized that if you talk to a fireman and you say, what's the best alarm system on the market, he'll go and point you at a fire alarm. And if you talk to a copper about the best alarm system on the market, he'll point you at a burglar alarm. And that's because the fireman turns up every day at somebody's house that's just burnt down, and a copper turns up after they've been burgled. So we tend to conflate what is real to us and what we experience, and we pollute the numbers that we're making up on the fly. So that's a real problem. The next thing is what I call sort of the problems with risk modeling, which stems back to a talk I saw years ago where a guy said, do you know you're more at risk at getting eaten by killed by a vending machine than you are at getting eaten by a shark? It's twice as more likely to get killed by a vending machine than killed by a shark. And I thought at the time, that's kind of interesting. It's probably changed now because of global warming and all that. But what, again, is looking through my risky lens, I started to then obsess about this statistic. And I was like, well, who was going around getting all the numbers for all the people that have been eaten by, I imagine someone with a clipboard going like with a shark on one and vending machine and going, one more for shark, one more for vending machine. And then I thought, well, hang on a minute, I don't even go in the sea. I'm never going to get eaten by a shark unless there's this real weird chain of events. But I do eat a lot of sugary snacks from vending machines. Does that count? If I smoke and eat sugary snacks from a vending machine, and I die from that, is he going to tick them up? So I realized that the whole thing is nonsense. And yet we use these statistics and we parrot these statistics that we see in the newspaper that are complete works of fiction and are attempts to physically come up with a number for something that's so nuanced it's ridiculous. So our risk is very good for coming up with a list and then triaging it very, very quick and dirty. That thing is more important than that thing. But it's not very good at sorting out what goes on either side of a metaphysical line, which is do something, don't do something, and that's where we start to have issues. The other thing, which is one of my personal pet hates, is for some reason, Infosec people tend to have this blind spot where we fail to factor in the status quo when we look at something. If it's not perfect, we're not interested. So perfection is better than something that's a bit ordinary, but ordinary is still a lot better than rubbish, right? So you start to see this, don't ever write your passwords down everywhere. We share the photos of the password diary for sale, and we go, oh my God, somebody's going to write their password down in a book. Well, hey-ho, the alternative is that they use the same password, which is their dog's name, for everything. So in that context, writing down your passwords, if that's going to allow you to have different passwords, is not a bad thing. Cloud-based password safe insecure, bro. I've heard this a million times. Don't put your passwords in the cloud. Well, again, the alternative is that they write it down in a book, right? So anything that is an iterative gain. Biometrics are inherently flawed because the TSA can force you to put your finger, or they can stick a phone on a corpse's finger and they can get into your phone. Well, the alternative is a 4-digit PIN that's probably 1, 2, 3, 4. SMS for multi-factor auth. Don't use SMS for MFA because someone can steal your phone. Well, if two-factor or single-factor auth is the equivalent, then SMS for MFA is pretty damn good. And the cloud is just other people's computers, we say glibly as we shake our heads. But the cloud, in many cases, is a hell of a lot more secure than people running their own exchange farms and so on and so forth in 2018. OK, so bringing it home, maybe get some more time back. I thought about the venue, and I thought about the normal purpose of this venue, and I thought that in honor of that and its normal function, and by the power vested in me, I thought I'd propose that we all say a vow. So I'd like you to put your right hand on your chest and say after me, I, insert name, do solemnly vow that I will weigh up the status quo before unloading on Twitter, that I shall acknowledge that whilst risk is a great tool, it's also finger in the windy AF, registered trademark. And what is more, I acknowledge that statistics in this space are mostly works of fiction, and I will do my best not to further pollute them with my own paranoid delusions. And now everybody understands risk. Oh, that was my final joke, and I blew it. Webcam covers are the equivalent of having oven gloves next to your fire extinguisher. If your fire extinguisher is too hot to use with your bare hands, it's too late to use the fire extinguisher. Just an idea.
I've got questions, but there's got to be questions from the audience. No. Yep.
So I didn't see a slide that had anything about advantage. Like, what do you get from taking that risk? That's very big.
What do you get for taking a risk? Well, you get to not go bankrupt as a company by taking a risk. Yeah. Companies don't get into business to buy security tools and services. They get in business to get business, and we just get in the way. So yeah, you're right. It's
most Infosec people seem to think that people are asking how risky is that to say stop.
Yeah, like risk is a bad thing. It's not. Risk is a good thing. You've just got to tweak it to match your risk appetite profile. Well, that shirt's pretty risky. Sorry.
Yeah, dude.
We constantly have a debate about likelihood. Do you have anywhere you can point to something to kind of create a standardized way to work out likelihood?
Well, the obvious answer is the ISO 31000 standard, which has a template-y kind of, these are the likelihood things that populate these buckets that we populate. And it's, rare is once a year, likely is once every 6 months or so. And you can kind of tweak that as you need to. But it doesn't really matter as long as when you finish up doing whatever assessment or whatever work you're doing, you have a spread of risks in different boxes. It's absolutely no use if you get to the end of your exercise and all your risks are in one box or in a straight line, because you haven't. What you're trying to do is use it to triage things so that you can address one thing before the other thing. It's all it is. It's a very quick and dirty tool to help you get some purchase and acknowledge that there is a list of things you're going to end up with. You're only going to have enough time and money and resources to address maybe 4 of a list of 20 things. So what you need to do is be comfortable and be able to sleep at night that you've addressed the 4 that really need to be addressed. And more important, you've got a defensible position when somebody comes to you and with a pointy finger and says, why didn't you do this? We just got owned because of X, and you didn't do the thing that would have stopped that. And now you've got some nice, clear, well-documented rationale for we didn't do X because we didn't have enough money to do that because we spent it on this. And that's really what it boils down to, is a defensible position, which sounds like weasel words, but Sorry, that's a weird roundabout consultative answer.
Excellent presentation. Any tips on communicating? So we said we don't know how to communicate.
Oh, I didn't say we don't know how to communicate. I say people on LinkedIn write blogs about how we don't know how to communicate. I think that the communication thing is a red herring. I think we do know how to communicate, and I think that the business understands risk. Where it kind of falls down is risk comes, I think, probably from the insurance world where they have pages and pages and pages of data, and that data is super accurate. And we've co-opted that system, and we're running with it, even though the dirty secret is we don't actually have any numbers. So we just finger in the wind. Cool. Communicate, be funny, be honest, give a shit.
Do you mind if we use your risk matrix?
Yeah, go for it. It's un-Australian to deny you the chance to steal stuff.
So it feels to me like you're trying to say there's no way to build an environment that can be guaranteed unhackable.
Oh, I'm not saying that. I think the Infosec industry has been saying that for a long time, and I wouldn't take a stand against that premise. I think it's probably possible to create a system that isn't insecure, but that system would be completely useless, right? So I guess the question is, if you take your webcam cover sticker off your camera and stick it on your PowerPoint, and then wait for the battery to drain, now you've just used that tool to make your computer 100% secure. So conceptually it's possible, but it's a scale, right? And you've got and risk is a way to try and find that right trade-off or that right balance between stupidly secure, I need to scan my iris every time I go to the toilet, or YOLO, we use the same password for everything.
And they're the only two options, right?
Yeah. It's binary. It's binary, everything.
Everyone give it up for Eric.